and has great purpose to the collective. The smallest voice is also similar to a child's voice. It's said that you should always be children in a room when decision processes are happening, so that they bring forward that information to generations that the decision makers won't meet. The smallest voice is a way that we practice equity. If you exert any form of more importance over another, you are acting out of line of the protocol, and because we are all equal in our voice. The smallest voice is also a reminder to stay humble and not make yourself more important in any situation. And are you gonna speak to, anyways. Another to think about, and that is, so for me, I will always put a youth's voice first in a story. It's up to me as a creative person. If, a lot of people will be like, well, they're not the main voice, like it should start off with somebody who's weaved into the story, but it's my responsibility to be able to do that in a good way, like to be able to hold up our youth's voices in a good way. That's my responsibility. And my responsibility, my accountability comes before any editing style. So, and then, we're gifted storytellers. We know how to do that in a good way. And so so that's how we will write in our stories. So for some, it might be that there's a matriarch, and maybe there is a speaker. A lot of, especially in the West Coast, they have a lot of trained speakers. It takes a lifetime to be trained to speak for the people. And those are the ones that you're going to want to put first, or you want to amplify their voice. You're honoring those, their structures of their systems and their knowledge systems by doing that.
Also, one way I think of a smallest voice too is even thinking about stories about our kin who are living or houseless on the streets, and how their voices, especially in stories about being houseless, aren't even reflected at all. They're basically left to be observed and then written about. And so there's this one story that I saw in Kelowna, and they talked to a gentleman, and he just explained it so simply, and it made so much sense, that the reason that there was so much more petty theft was because the police were just removing the drug that they were taking. But it was such a small portion. And so they were saying, well, you keep taking it, so we keep doing petty crime in order to get the money for it again. And it's just one of those things where it's that's a perspective that I would never go to. As a reader, I was like, oh, that actually, I at least understand why it's happening and why it's increasing. And something so small, the voice being so powerful in that way, that can actually come from a lived experience and share these things, but are always seen as insignificant, when really the power behind the story could be so much more had they been involved. And then, so there's the art piece here. And so this is my Halloween Four Food Chiefs art piece, and so they all dressed up as each other. So Chief Sqilx'w and then Chief syilx, seeing as it's the polarity, they dressed up as each other, and they all got even Chief Sqilx'w has little sticks tied to his arms, so he could be Chief syilx, and they all got their little birch bark baskets about to go trick-or-treating. And then there's Salmon and Bitterroot dressed up as each other, and she's kind of giving him a look. Maybe I don't know, he probably wasn't thinking about somebody. Yes. And then in the background, as Secwepemc always does, he always tries to join. So that's one thing I always like to add into all my art pieces is Coyote in the background trying to make a presence, because they always leave him out. And so he dressed up as Brother Fox, and that's actually another one of our chaptik where Brother Fox is always saving Coyote, because Coyote dies a lot in our chaptik, and then Brother Fox has the ability to bring him back to life. So in order to be allowed to go trick-or-treating with them, he dressed up as his brother. And it's just kind of one of those examples of how we storytell in our imagery and how simple it looks, but how complex it really is.
I love that. And I wanted to expand a little bit on also the children being in every room where there's decisions being made. Because not only is it a reminder visually that that's who you're working for, that that's who you are doing the work for, but it's also, like my kids get called as youth witnesses a lot to different things, because that's one of our forms of time transcendence. We have many forms that we travel time, shift time, and that's one of them, is that she will remember everything that was spoken about, and she's the one who brings that to the future. And you hear that a lot when elders are talking, where they'll say, oh, my grandparents were sitting at the table one day and they were talking about this. That was that form. We just did it naturally, where we made sure there was kids around to hear these conversations happening. They don't need to engage, but just to hear it and to know that they can carry that forward is one of those teachings I just wanted to bring up. Language matters, so honoring place name carries medicine. Even place holds energy, and energy is in a perpetual state of motion. Indigenous peoples honor the land by living in kinship and alignment with the energy of place, because we are also part of that energy. We are literally born from it. This is why when we say the land is happy when we visit it, it knows us, it knows our songs, our footsteps, our names, it knows our prayers, it knows our voice, because our bodies are quite literally made up of the same energy. To honor place is to honor the people. The land, in a sense, asks us to call them by their name. Place names are often descriptive of the place and the use of that place. It was almost instructional. That's one way in which the land speaks to us. So honoring place name is important in enlivening the energy and instruction of its use. It's really easy to ignore the place names and to just put colonial names in its place, but that's how we colonize the land. And so I always really highly suggest people to put the original place name, the actual name first, and then English in brackets. I also, for myself, when I'm writing, I'll say in what has been very briefly known as, because that's that switch on time, right? It's only very briefly been known that. And so we think about how we set these things up in our stories and how we add more importance to why place names are so important. A place name will tell you how to use it. And then when we talk about the energy of place, one of our teachings is that to truly have a place know you and for its medicines to work with you, you have to visit it in days of your deepest grief, and you have to visit it in the days of your highest joy, because it needs to know all aspects of you, and then it gets to know who you are. And we do that through just visiting. Like Lauren and I have a spot that we always love to bring our kids to in the creek, and we go there to grieve, we go there to cry, we go there to do our ceremony swim, and then we also go there to just hang out and to swim and to have joy on the land as well. And our teaching is that our land loves us because we love it. And so it's really important in our land, because it's that energy that we talked about. It's that inanimate energy. We are going to visit our relatives, and it's so happy to see us. And so sometimes when we go to a place, and we'll just sing to it, we'll just sing to the land its songs, because we know that no one's visited that area in a long time. And so especially in Kelowna, the energy there is really low. Our people aren't as present there because of the cost of living, because of all those colonial things that are happening, because of capitalism. And so we don't have a presence there as much. So sometimes we just go there to sing to the land. We just want it to know that we're still here and that we love it and that we're caretaking and we're doing our responsibilities. And then they say that when you stir up the spirits of the land that hasn't been visited for a while, that's when like storms come, that's when wind comes, but it's actually just coming to play with you because it's really happy. And so people will be like, whoa, like that's crazy, like it seems mad. It's like, it's not mad, it's happy. And then sometimes in ceremony, when we ceremony in a place and then wind gets really crazy, we ask the children to talk to the wind because they have a closer connection. And so the children will, the elders will direct them and say, you guys talk to the wind and tell it to stop playing, that now is not the time to play with us. And we have work to do. And so they do, they'll go sit on the shore or whatever, and they'll all sit and pray and talk to the wind, and it calms down. And behind them as they're doing that, the elders breathe words of love into them. They say, you're powerful enough to do this. You're powerful enough to make the wind stop. You're powerful enough to use your voice. You're powerful enough. And they just pour and pour love into them. Like literally we'll sit behind them and say that to them. And then they sit in their meditation. And that's what we talk about with the discipline of ceremony, is that disciplined mind. It's discipline for us is not a bad thing at all. It's a beautiful thing. And so it's our trust that we have in our ceremony. So we have to calm our minds, and that's what we teach our young kids to do.
One more thing on just like how powerful that is when somebody is standing beside you, because we'll see like our kids standing in the ice cold water in the middle of winter. Doing the ceremony, and on the shore is the elders saying these things to them, and it really puts like this big reflection on what residential schools were. So like to put shame into that was never our way. As you see, like we sit there and we tell people how beautiful and powerful they are, and like that's something that we need them to recognize within themselves, as opposed to residential schools, which was built to strip all of that away. And so having us come back home to ourselves through all these processes, and it's not always the easiest thing to navigate, and through ceremony and honoring these types of things, and like when they're reflected within stories, especially local stories, is just bringing somebody like home to themselves when they start to see themselves accurately reflected.
Yeah, I wrote a story once about what it was like to grow up on the res, and being a res kid, and how beautiful it was for us. And I know it's not like that for everybody, but I just wrote about just, the intergenerational, like the family, being accountable to your community when you grow up on the res. And they always say, like, everybody knows everybody's business. But that's because we're accountable to our people for how we act. And I tell my kids, I say, as soon as you represent every single sqilx'w in our community, with whatever choices you make with your life, and so we think about the accountability we have to our people. But yeah, so we end up in our ceremonies really pouring all of that sqilx'w confidence back into our children, and that's what we call it. That's what the elders call it, is sqilx'w confidence. This confidence to be ourselves and to know and trust our teachings. And I always want to say, like, it's such a great act of courage for our elders who all went to residential school to be the ones to whisper these affirmations of love to our children. And in that story that I wrote, or it was a newsletter, in the newsletter I wrote, I got so many amazing emails back. I don't call them newsletters, I called them love letters. And how I refer to everybody that reads any of my work is my cousins. And because we're kin, regardless. And so I wrote my love letter about what it was like to grow up on the res. All those moments that are so like, just made up who we are. And I got this one love letter back, and it made me cry. It was so beautiful. She's like, I'm from your reserve, or I'm from the same reserve. I never got to grow up there. I never got to know it. I've lived in Vancouver my whole life. She said, but reading that made me feel like I was part of it. And so she printed it up and put it all on her wall so she could keep reflecting on what it's like. And I just love that. Like, and for me, that's exactly why we should be doing the work we do. That's why Indigenous reflection pieces, when you are Indigenous or sqilx'w and you're writing about sqilx'w things, to have a reflection piece to accompany it, to talk about the importance of why you did it, it's so beautiful. I love those pieces, and I encourage people to do that, and I encourage outlets to allow Indigenous people to do that, to allow them to reflect on their pieces and what healing it brought to them, because the more stories we collect in here, the more we call our spirits home to ourselves. The more we feel acknowledged and recognized as well as keepers of story. So I always think that there's a lot of power in that. So doing our part in language revitalization, sqilx'w always reminds us that we must honor names. This has great purpose and power. It's impactful and a great sign of respect to use place-specific Indigenous language first, and then follow that with brackets, in English with brackets. Ensure that you are aware of any grammatical applications that apply to the Indigenous language. All of those that you reach out to must be acknowledged for the time and the knowledge that they shared with you. That is upholding protocol for knowledge keepers and knowledge holders. You should also always ensure that those knowledge people are well compensated and taken care of for sharing their language. It is an extremely traumatic experience for for our people to learn our language again. We have to acknowledge the violence in which it was taken, to be able to relearn, to be able to speak the language. Which is why some of us, like including myself and Lauren, have a really hard time learning the language, because there's so much unraveling that you have to do to learn it. There's a lot of trauma that goes into it, and yeah, it's a really painful process for a lot of people. So when you're just, oh, hey, how do you say this in your language? It might not always be an easy thing for somebody. It might not always be something they're willing to share. And so when I write stories, and I want to make sure that the way I'm saying, using a word is correct, and I ask one of my friends who's a language keeper, I acknowledge her at the bottom of the story all the time. I say language, was shared by Sarah Alexis of Syilx Nation, where she learned her language from this area because of all the dialectual differences, honoring that, language can be political in our communities. Like, if you know, you know. But language can always be, can be touchy depending on what dialect you're speaking from. So I always do that just for full transparency, and also honoring that that young person did that work to reclaim our language. So Secwepemc leaves sqilx'w to eat his berries and brings us to see sqilx'w. She is busily preparing root medicine for us, and she will share how thoughtfully creating medicine is nourishment for the people. This is me and Lauren's babies. That's my son, and that's Lauren's daughter, Brooklyn. But I always say it's my daughter. Like, so she had my daughter. Because me and Brooklyn are two peas in a pod, so. And she's two peas in a pod with my older daughter. And my older daughter's just chill and relaxed, and that's Lauren. And then my niece, Brooklyn, is just wild. She's just a loving young girl. So tone and delivery. It's often seen as disrespectful to use a tone that may make someone feel small and inferior. Using a neutral tone is important and kind, and makes one feel included in the conversation happening. sqilx'w would quickly remind you that if you are not working to create belonging among people, you are creating division. Division creates more of the same as what we see today. It creates the environment for violence to breed. That violence feeds the narrative that human value is based on a hierarchy. sqilx'w reminds you that being mindful of your tone so it doesn't come across as demeaning matters. It particularly matters to sqilx'w people who for generations have had their intelligence spoken down on. So it's that hypervigilance created by many fires. I always like to talk about that because even when we're in interviews, how people's tones are when you're doing sort of like more of a fact checking, you have to prove yourself over and over and over, and we already have to prove ourselves on a daily basis. And so having that tone is so important. Explaining why you're asking questions, explaining and sharing the process of why those questions are being asked is something we'll talk a little bit more about later, but is very kind to do. So sourcing traditional knowledge and outreach practices. Do not pressure anyone into doing work with you or your organization. Refrain from explaining how it can help others or assert any ideas of a reward. This is extractive and inauthentic, and is often felt by people who are living in kinship with trauma and maybe living with that hyper-awareness of danger. So we see that a lot too, being like, oh, I would love to get your story out there. I think it's, I would love to share this and that. And if it's a story based on trauma, you should never be the one reaching out to people. We've seen that in the uncovering of the 215, and we talked about it on the panel yesterday about, at that time at IndigiNews, we chose not to reach out to anybody. We did not reach out to not one survivor. We held space, and we held a safe space for people to share their stories with us through their own agency. If they wanted to, we said we were there to do that in a safe way. And we would take as much time as we needed. We also did the blackout, and we went dark as the fire was burning. So we followed ceremony protocol at the time. So when we're grieving, and this is kind of common, I guess, for a lot of Indigenous people, is that When we find out of the death, we light the fire to help the spirits be guided home. We're not to do any other work during that time. We are to focus on supporting family. We're to focus on supporting each other. When that fire's lit, everything stops because we're honoring spirit. So when they put the fire out is when we were like, okay, let's think about our game plan, how we're going to approach this. So we did our self-location, and we just worked from that. And I really encourage people, when you're going to work on something really heavy or something, where there's an event that impacts Indigenous people, to self-locate, to ask yourself, am I the one to tell this story? Is this my story to tell? How has my lived experience poured into how I will share this story? And then write about it, and write about the strength that you're going to come to it with. So for me, I wrote about it as a mother, and I said, I do this for my babies, I do this for my grandchildren, hopefully. I do this, for every single woman in my life who never got a voice. That's who I do it for, and I come to it with that knowing. And then in that same breath, and I acknowledge that I'm not going to share trauma stories. I'm not going to share survivor stories. That's not going to be good for my heart. And so we wrote the storytelling intentions of how we were going to report on it. And every time I felt like I was wavering, every time I felt I was about to break, every time I felt really bad about something, I would read it again, and it would remind me, like, okay, you actually don't need to do that story. You don't have to do it. If it doesn't feel good to you, you don't have to do it. You have agency, and you're allowed to have the feelings, because not only, I was in ceremony too, just as much as everyone else. And so we have to acknowledge that our sacredness during that time is really powerful. When that happened, all Indigenous people moved into a place that in our nation we call hahat, which means very sacred. And it means that you're very powerful. They say that when people are grieving, we would go to them and ask them for prayers, because they're really close to Creator at the time, and they are very, very powerful in their grief. That's why in our year of grief, we should never, there's protocols of you don't cook or whatever. Yeah, you don't hunt, you don't do any of those things, because we're so powerful. And so, in those times, we got to think of ourselves as Indigenous people. If we're grieving and we're writing a story, we have to think of ourselves, and we have to think of the medicine that we might be putting out as well. And so honor yourself in your storytelling first, and make sure that you're taking care of you. So I kind of spoke to the second part already, but self-locating on each project. Sqilx'w asks you to first and foremost ask yourself and others in your outlet, am I the one to tell this story? If the answer is no, then who can you bring onto your team that is the right person? Can you hire a community storyteller to tell the story in a good way that doesn't violate cultural protocols of the people? Are you able to open your mind and give up space to empower others so you can shift the narrative of the messaging? And so the reason that we really encourage people to use community storytellers is because Indigenous people know their people. You know the protocols of your home. You know that, so we'll say in our nation, our grieving process is 3 to 4 days is how long the fire goes for. But in others, I've seen it go for 10. And so you don't know that as a person not from that community. So it just empowers the community, or empowers the storytelling even more. So protocol to keeping good relations. Oh, I guess I'll change this one. So Sqilx'w and sqilx'w both remind people that protocol is key in order to enter good kinship. Each nation, and sometimes different places throughout a nation, carry different protocols. There is a protocol for engagement, there's a protocol for land access, there is a protocol for grief and mourning, there is protocol for entering someone's home, there is protocol in sharing a meal, there is protocol in each aspect of our lives as Indigenous peoples that govern our lives and why we honor our life as a ceremony. This provides us with the safety of knowing through inherent knowings. So I always say culture is the most reliable thing we have as Indigenous people. So they say when you feel really lost, when you feel just really disconnected, think of the season that you're in and what you should be doing, because we know that. That's the one basic thing we know. So let's say right now, if I go through a really hard time, I know that the salmon are coming soon. I know that I have work to do. I know that I need to be down at the river. I know that we need to start canning. I know that all of these things need to start. So just start with the basics. Start with the season that you're in and honoring whatever it is that's happening in that season, because that's what we can cling on to in the moment while we work through hard times. That's how we keep our spirit here, is by becoming one with the season. Spitlam gives Sqilx'w some of her medicine roots for his journey down to the river to see Ntiti. Spitlam waves to him and says white and reminds him to stay away from the edge of the river because he always falls in. Sqilx'w says, yeah, and clumsily goes along down to the river to see what kinds of things Ntiti was doing. He usually has some very lively stories. So Chief Ntiti remembers being in ceremony with the sqilx'w people's tears. Ntiti tells Sqilx'w of the time the sqilx'w people came to the river to cry. He said they were sad because of the loss of connection to some of their homelands, the loss of sacred places that connected them to the land. He's sad and he witnessed them moving into kinship with trauma. Ntiti would challenge not only yourself, but your outlet and the standards that you're guided by. If for so long Indigenous peoples have been harmed by policy or forced assimilation through cultural divides, then as someone who chooses to work alongside sqilx'w people, your only choice is to advocate for change as a person with a privileged voice. As journalists, we do carry a certain amount of privilege to have a voice and have a platform to begin humanizing those that we write with. And for white folks, it's important to work on those challenges, on the challenges that Indigenous peoples have been exhausted by through meaningful and direct action, and that is Ntiti energy. Chief Ntiti takes action through responsibility, not ownership. Hashtag land back.
So Ntiti often has to create ways to get past the man-made structure. He's a good reminder that life will continue to exist beyond our time here and that nobody, not even sqilx'w people, own the land. Sqilx'w and Ntiti remind us that land is not property, but a shared collective responsibility. The land is never in ownership of anyone in sqilx'w stories. It is cared for by the people to be, the future generations. We will never take possession, nor will they, because the stories of the land will guide them to caretake the land as a responsibility, not a right. To take care of the land is a form of time transcendence. It's an offering to the future generations. We are reminded when we eat berries that it's our ancestors who took care of their health, also because an offering to the future people to be's wellness. Now you are also eating the berries and taking care of your body. In caring for the health of the land in all ways, you are nourishing the future people to be. It's a way to show our future we love them. It's our prayer that they continue to do the same. So when it comes to like the land back, I know some people really mean like, like, you know, like
Actual eviction.
an actual eviction of people, but not necessarily. Land back is really just allowing us to take on our own responsibilities and caretaking of the land and making sure that we have the people who speak for the land and making sure that it's taken care of. Because as we even look at, again, our Naukenwich process where we had people who spoke for the land and they were to be respected and honored, and we don't see that a lot today. And so when it's seen as like we're talking about the land, people see it as a form of property, something that is to be held on to themselves, and that's never been our way. So the healing of our land, our people, and our nature spirits are fundamental right now. Understanding prayers, compassion, and love to be sent to each other no matter where we stand is the direction we need to lead in. If we take care of the land, land will take care of us. We are beautiful because our land is beautiful. To truly know any place, you need to live in its full life process. The consciousness of the earth is us, and we are relevant and significant to the future of the earth.
There you go. Our Okanagan song, that's what it translates to. Our nation song is we are beautiful because our land is beautiful. And so they say that if our land is not beautiful, if we don't take care of it, then us as sqilx'w people are not beautiful. And we really believe in beautifying our space, both physically and aesthetically, but as well as through how we engage with it and how we talk to it. We always remember the aspects of beauty. So Chief Ntiti takes action through responsibility, not ownership. #databack. As the custodians of data, sqilx'w peoples assert our right to control, protect, and govern the collection, analysis, and dissemination of our data. Data sovereignty is a very new kind of conversation, I feel like. I mean, it's not new, but it's getting more traction, I think, now, which is really important, and something, again, if you go to our website, Lauren and I really honor data sovereignty in all of our work. We don't own anything that does not belong to our people. I refuse to hold on to a recording that belongs to another nation. That's not mine. That's not my intelligence. I just take the bare minimum of what I need to publish, and I return all data. Data sovereignty is an essential and inherent right for sqilx'w people, affirming self-determination, knowledge preservation, and empowerment in the digital age. It encompasses the right to control, govern, and determine the collection, management, and utilization of data that belongs to sqilx'w homelands, knowledge systems, and resources. Data sovereignty is crucial because it allows sqilx'w people to tell their own stories, reclaim their narratives, and challenge the historical and ongoing misrepresentation and erasure of Indigenous voices and experiences. It enables communities to protect knowledge, traditional knowledge systems, and sacred information from exploitation or misuse by external entities. Data sovereignty recognizes the importance of Indigenous ways of knowing, including oral storytelling and Indigenous research methodologies. It acknowledges the validity and value of sqilx'w homeland knowledge systems and ensures that data practices align with cultural protocols and ethical considerations. So here's some ways to take part in #DataBack. Keep only what you need on file to publish. So for instance, keeping only portions of a transcript and necessary clips of recordings, and returning entire files, audio transcripts, images, everything, even images that you feel you're gonna use, returning all of it back to the person that shared with you. Use what you've been given to share, what you agreed to in protocol meetings, and only use the information in context. Do not remove pieces of a story to share as an ad or anything else without consent. And so we'll go into the protocol meetings, but that is what we do. It's what we call a protocol meeting, but it's a pre-meeting whenever I'm about to write a story with somebody, or we engage with anybody, is we share with them the whole process, what it looks like. We're transparent about everything. We share the terms of what everything means. Uphold nation data sovereignty laws where there is one. Defer to their law. We must honor Indigenous law as a valid form of law. Hire local storytellers who can honor relational storytelling and where information stays within the respective homeland. So a lot of places, including our nation, is developing a data sovereignty law. And so I always say, look for people who have those, ask if they have one, like if you're communicating with a band or something, and you just ask, do you have a data sovereignty law? Does your nation have one? How would you like these images transferred to you? And then within the protocol agreement, I always say, this is what I'm keeping on file. I show them exactly what I have on file that is their intelligence. And then I give everything to them, full copies of everything. That is their story that belongs to them. I think it's a tragedy to think about how many journalists have our elder stories, have our stories in their hands and their possession that we've never gotten access to. We've never got to hear some of these elders' voices. And having that data, it's a colonization of our data. And so it's really important that we start showing our people what that looks like. I always say we have to lead the way, because a lot of people will be like, well, what is data sovereignty? Without realizing that people are actively stealing their intelligence through forms of media or research or anything like that. And so to share with them that this belongs to you and tell them that this is your story, this belongs to you, this is what I'm keeping, and sharing that knowledge, because a lot of times we don't even know that these are conversations that should be happening. And I always say we have to teach people how, we have to teach people these things so that we don't allow mistreatment from others to happen to them. Secwepemc leaves Antitik and dips into the nearby camp to sneak a little wind-dried salmon before he sets off to the Chief Syilx hillside. Chief syilx was blowing in the wind, enjoying the moment, and bending and swaying, creating beautiful motion with her long branches adorned in syilx berries.
So, syilx stays flexible, ever moving and flowing, but is firmly rooted. Although the image on its own may seem like a simple piece, the teachings that are carried within it are so powerful and speak to the ancestral knowledge passed down through its preservation and protection through colonization. Oh, it's not even.
Oh, sorry.
There it is. So this is an art piece that I had created for. Actually, I just created it on my own. And then I kind of enhanced it as we had the fires come through the community. And because fire really is a cleansing thing, it can be like coming forward with so much trauma, especially right now with all these big fire seasons. But it also just kind of shows that we need to start returning to our own roots on doing cultural burning. And that's what this art piece was attached to, was a story that we had done with the gentleman who is doing that work within our homelands, and he is doing all the cultural burning, and it actually has saved a lot of their people in their community from having their houses burned down. And so returning to those roots and things that we've always done. These are things that we've always had happening, and because of the fact that it's been so neglected, and we haven't been caretaking the lands like we were born to do, that it actually has created a lot of negative impacts. And so everything in here is just kind of coming from the infinite source, which would be Kulin, as we say, which is creator, and coming out and expanding. And so through all the medicines, those are actually kind of representing different parts of us, different energy centers that you would need to fulfill with the certain medicines that I have attached. And as it goes around and it starts to grow, we need to make sure that those things that are growing are cleansing, and we're bringing forward opportunities for renewal. And then it kind of expands out into all the knowledge that we hold today. A really amazing thing that I was lucky to have said to me was by Dr. Jeanette Armstrong. And she was just saying that when we look at like ancestral knowledge, any sort of person who has a knowledge keeper, and we kind of look at the knowledge as just knowledge, when there's evidence to support its validity, it's actually Indigenous science. So we're moving out of the way of knowledge and treating it and respecting it as a science, because it is. And a lot of times we look today and we're like, oh, Western science discovered this, but like we knew already. We've been known. Yeah. So it's like, really, it always feels as though they're just catching up with us. And then we get invalidated all the time with our knowledge. And then as soon as it becomes valid to science, Western science, then all of a sudden it's real. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's like what you guys say. And it's like, yes, Kikania, listen. So I feel like we're coming to a time now, though, where it really is being honored in so many ways, which is amazing. So syilx shares her reminders that art is identity, and identity must be rooted in accuracy. The ceremony of art touches the deepest realm of the psyche and the sacred dimension of the artistic creative process. The sacred level of art not only transforms something into art, but also transforms the artist at the very core of their being. This makes the process more important than the product. Artwork should always be sourced from the people of the land you are working with. Art for sqilx'w people hold many truths, stories, and interconnections that oftentimes can't be spoken in the English language. A connection to the energy of the land and the knowledge carried will produce a piece that speaks to the Tk'emlups or the life force. So for compensation, we always kind of move through the world and always hear about the starving artist. And I think of this is any sort of artistic creative, basically. When creatives create, it's the most beautiful thing. And so I think of everyone's beaded earrings artists. And it's luxury jewelry that is it needs to be marked up in price. I understand it's for affordability of our people, but the art that gets put into this, the intention, the love, the care is just so priceless. And I think that as we move through, we just really don't understand the importance that lies within art and creativity and what that process brings to making everything beautiful. Even when you think about graphic design, walking into a grocery store, you're surrounded by it. If there was no graphic design and there was literally just a bottle with a label of it on it,
The no name brand.
No name. it was all no name, then it really wouldn't, we wouldn't be drawn to it. So it really does connect to the part of your mind that makes it stand out among others. And so for compensation must be appropriate and thoughtful. This does have power in honoring someone's time and knowledge. This honors the artist's journey and speaks to the actual value of their creations. And so for proper representation, there's a lot of ceremony and intention that goes into art that are there for the particular nation and rooted in their teachings, respecting what medicine artists bring from different nations that bring to their own work. And so for respecting creative energy, to be in your creative energy is to be in ceremony. There is power in allowing someone to share their teachings through creative expression. It's a mental state where people find safety and belonging, so we must honor the process. So I'll speak for myself when I'm going through my process of art. I very much need to be in a particular mindset. I need to take care of myself in a certain way, and I can't force creative energy. I'll have to walk away from a piece sometimes for weeks because I can't get into that creative process that's necessary for me to be able to express myself properly. And to be in the creative process, you need to be void of shame, which is really challenging and needs to be honored as something that is not just easy. It's not just picking up a pen and drawing a picture. There's so much more that goes into it, and the amount of layers and complexity that comes with art. And so for proper representation, a lot of times, especially with us being on the West Coast, we kind of get blanketed over with our kin who are from the West Coast and their style of art. And there's such a big ceremonial, in order to even be able to do anything, the precision is wild. And something that isn't a part of me. So sometimes I notice when I look at art that comes from our homelands, I start to recognize, oh, there's our food chiefs. There's sqilx'w being a brat over there. And so it really does speak to who I am as a person. And I always just like to say too, when it comes to, if you ever want to source art from, I would love to see more from the youth. Especially youth digital artists and everything. When you apply for grants a lot, for art pieces and stuff, they require you to be published somewhere. And so if you using a youth's art can actually allow them to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to have their work published, and they now are considered an accomplished artist, and they can actually apply for different grants for their art pieces. Because actually that was the big thing that I realized because of IndigiNews I was able to do.
So syilx shares some examples of storytelling and imagery. Syilx tells sqilx'w of the time that she saw a still image and it shared a story her heart understood. You can use photos and imagery to shift the perspective of Indigenous peoples, to share images that are bold, colorful, and thought-provoking, where Indigenous peoples are represented accurately. Photography has been one of the many forms of propaganda used in the colonization of Indigenous peoples. Photography has been weaponized in its use to create a false narrative about Indigenous peoples. Sharing images of Indigenous peoples at ceremonial actions and then using these images out of context to create fear in media has been a powerful tool. So this is a story that I took, a photo I took of my daughter. And we were just trying to depict the power of our culture. And so that's the residential school, the Tk'emlups Indian residential school where our family all went. That's casted onto her. And then in front of her, she's using the drum to shield her from it. And using our culture and our songs to re-enliven who she is. And she's in full color. She's present in today. And so we use this image to tell that story about the power and the importance of our culture and what it does for our young people. And she's sitting in a desk that is reminiscent of the days, or of the residential schools. So this is a picture that I took at the syilx celebration, which is a celebration of our stories in the Okanagan. That little girl there is wearing a traditional tea dress. So this is actual dress that we wear in ceremony. And so what we find in our nation especially is people taking pictures, coming to our communities and taking pictures of our local powwows, and sharing that as the images of and reflections of who sqilx'w people are. And while a lot of our people powwow is that form of celebration, it doesn't belong to us and it's not actually our identity. And so for them to keep showing us that in media only perpetuates that cultural erasure of who we really are. And so that's what that little tea dress she's wearing is part of our winter dances ceremonies. So that would be an accurate representation of who we are. Whereas if you were to put up a powwow, people just think, oh, Indigenous powwow, you know, that pan-Indianism, and then they reflect that back to our young people in our community, then they think, oh, that's who we are. We powwow dance, but that's a borrowed tradition. It's not, it doesn't belong to us, and we need to honor where it comes from. And so that's one thing I like to always share about. So this presentation needs to be a lot longer, so I'm like, I had to put point form right away. Like, things we can challenge in media. To label us as traumatized people devalues our worldview as Indigenous people, whose lives are governed by the land that so-called Canada is a guest on. It's a nod to white saviorism. So when you have decided to share our stories, that may be one of traumatic experiences, you also have the responsibility to take on ethical challenges in order to challenge this narrative. Indigenous people's trauma and grief is not news. It's someone's life ceremony that you are holding and sharing with the world, and it deserves to be honored as such. Stories should honor protocol of the people first. Challenging Duncan McHugh's narrative, like he was sharing the 4D narratives, dead, drunk, drumming, and dancing, challenging that narrative within your storytelling. Argue the bias, especially when it comes to holding space for Indigenous peoples. Our strength is in our kinships. It's not a reason that we cannot tell a story. I can tell the best story about my family better than anyone who doesn't know my family. And you can too. You can tell the best stories of your people because those are your people. And that's your strength, that your kinship is your strength. It is not a weakness in storytelling. Not every story is yours to tell, so self-locate so we can reduce harm. When we're talking about law in the story, whose law is being upheld? Whose narrative is being centered? So just questioning yourself on whose law. Challenge the Canadian press standards by using grammar to change the narrative and challenge people's shaped narratives in their minds. Again, using quotations around words that are colonial place names. And then it asks them to question the validity of that place. So Vernon, BC in quotes, right? It's that's not the real name of it. It's an imaginative name. And so when writing about, this is a big one, when writing about Indigenous peoples, refrain from using Canada as an equal in terms of phrasing. This is not accurate. One thing I've always come across with some editors or whatever, they'll be like, oh, well, you should capitalize this because we would capitalize it here in when we're talking about Canada or a Canada structure, we would capitalize it here, so we should capitalize it here. That's not accurate. We are not equals with Canada at all. In our nation, we're a sovereign nation. Our allyship is not with Canada. And so Canada is a subject. And so it would actually be completely inaccurate to do that. So honoring how we style our words. So in our language, all of our words are lowercase. Even names, everything is lowercase because we're egalitarian people, and it shows that nothing holds more importance over something else. Everything is important. So knowing those things when you're applying it to your story. Uphold the smallest voice and be creative building the narrative around it if needed, which we talked about in the story of the fly. Take the time to get to know the people before you work with them. It's building authentic relationships. Follow cultural protocols in your storytelling. If it feels like it's too much, then refrain from the story. So what I mean by that is during the uncovering of our 215 relatives in Tk'emlups, we had a lot of people ignoring our cultural protocols. They were showing up with cameras in our faces. It is against our protocol to have cameras in our faces while we're grieving. We're not allowed to have pictures of us while we're grieving. That's against protocol. And so when Lauren and I recently wrote a story on our cousin who died, she is a young lady. We used all of our grief protocol to write that story. So we waited until the fire was out before we started engaging in the writing of the story. The family asked us to write the story. We would never reach out to anybody to write about something like that. And then Lauren created a beautiful art piece of the young lady because we couldn't have her photo up because that's against our protocols. And so we created an art piece of her instead. We asked, like, what's her favorite colors? What are some of the beautiful things that represent her life? And we added it to Lauren added it to the art piece. That's how we can go above and beyond to take care of people, to take care of them when they want to share those stories, is to really imbue a lot of beauty into the process of it. And so we really made sure that we took great care of that story and the people involved in it. Right, and if you don't have those protocols and someone asks you to write, then again, find those knowledge people and compensate them for the time it takes them to advise you. It's also done are the days that we just give free information and just feel like we have to owe everything to, you know, media when they ask us. I think we have to really honor that people take time, that it takes a lot of responsibility to know your teachings, and so making sure that that happens. And write every story as if you were writing it about your own family. It's like basic, but but it's a powerful way to do it. So our last teaching about this section, slow down and honor the spirit's time. So challenge the colonial impatience. Honor spirit's time. Deadlines should never be more important than someone's people, or than the people, their families, or at the cost of someone else's well-being. Making people priority. In media, it's always that quick turnaround, let's get the story done, let's get it out. That's just colonial impatience. There's no need for it. We need to take time to slow down and to be in kinship and to be authentic and to be there in a good way. The first story is not always the best story. First stories are not always the ones winning awards either. They're the ones that are like really rushed, really thoughtless, and a lot of people are just focused on those things. They're focused on getting it out, getting my name recognized for breaking this. That's not what it's about. That's coyote energy. Coyote always tries to make himself more important than everyone else, and you get humbled all the time. Coyote's always being humbled. So, he literally dies in all of our stories. So, let's not be coyote. Challenge the notion of professionalism. Being mindful of the nature of professionalism is created to provide comfort to white people. Professionalism has been a colonially coded standard for what is comfortable to whiteness and limits belonging. In a world driven by capitalism, professionalism is based on a monochronic relationship to timeliness and style of work. A monochronic culture is more based on capitalism and individuality. It centers productivity over people. It values time commitments. It values time commitments. Values time commitments, linearly accomplishes tasks, and often favors individuals who also value the monochronic way of being. In contrast, polychronic cultures, while still able to get tasks completed, prioritize socialization and familial connections over economic labor. Indigenous communities have a deep connection to polychronic orientation. Some Indigenous folks may push against this by adopting a monochronic orientation, but still hold their polychronic work style. Therefore, they are more often critiqued for their jobs in a cultural bias against their norms. So the reason that we bring that up is, again, that rush, that the colonial impatience to get a story out, to get it done. Whereas for us, it's like, no, I want to be in the ceremony too. Like, I actually want to be part of it. I want to, and that's such a wild concept to people in journalism, right? That we want to be part of it, but we are part of it. We can't remove the sqilx'w from us. We are sqilx'w, and so I'm not going to any event or whatever to go report on anything. And make that my only job. I'm gonna go early. Like Lauren and I do a lot of work where we'll go early, we help set up, we will stay and take things down and put things away and support and help and be there and be involved, and not just be like awkwardly like there just taking pictures and doing interviews. I wanna take this moment to point out Aaron Evans. Aaron, wave. He's an amazing, amazing journalist, and I always bring him up in all of our trainings as an example. Aaron's not Indigenous, he's not from our community, but our community loves him. Because he showed up without recorders and without cameras, and he literally got to know our community. And we have banned several outlets from our community. Like, journalists are not allowed to enter because they're so harmful. IndigiNews is one of the only ones that we allow into the community, and that our people trust and our people know, and that our people are excited to share with. And that just goes so long or so far when you hold importance of building those kinships. So this is about sourcing stories, and we use the berry picking protocol to do that. Here we go. There we go. So I'm going to share the berry picking protocol, and then this will make more sense. So when we go into the forest, or we go wherever we're going to go, these are the things that we tell the kids as we're going in. We talk a lot about all of our protocols that we follow. So you stay on the trail. I tell them stay on the trail. You stay behind me. Don't veer off. Don't disturb ecosystems. Then we already are just by being there. And so we honor our footsteps all the time. We don't kick, pick, or touch anything, especially mushroom life that's growing, because it's really important for the nutrients of the forest. We don't pick the low-hanging berries. Those ones are for the animals, and those are for the earth. Those are the offerings there. Don't pick the easy to access berry bushes. We leave those ones for the elders. So if there's like really beautiful, plentiful berries, and they're like, a few meters off the road, or off the side of a road, that we're like, oh, elders could easily access that. We leave that alone. We leave that for them. We don't try and take from them. And then we don't pick at the high berries either. Those are for the birds. And then we don't pick any bush where the berries are, for the most part, not fully ready. And we don't pick from every bush. We let some seed for more berry bushes. And then we'll come back in a few years and we give the land time to heal. We never return to the same place to gather. When we're like, our kids are really good at remembering that too, where they'll be like, oh, we were here like 2 years ago. We wait 4 years before we go to the same place. We give the land time to heal. And then we always, if we're setting up camp for the day, we do it in a place that's away from all plant life, and we don't disturb anything. And then we give our offering before picking. We smudge before going in. We sit and we pray, and we get to know the place. We talk to it. That's a huge part of our process of picking berries, is we go early, and we go drink from the nearest water source if it's safe. I don't know. We don't even care. We'll drink it. We're just like, I hope. But it's such an important part of it. And the teaching behind that is that when you sit and you talk to the water that feeds the berries that you're about to pick, and then you drink from it, then you're embodying the DNA of that place, and you're becoming one with it. And then it will know you and be familiar with you. Because we don't just go into places that we don't know. We have a ceremony to actually like hide ourselves from the land if we haven't been there before, because we don't want to scare the Tk'emlups. And so that kinship building, even with our land, is important when we go to it. So that's why we use the berry picking protocol when we talk about sourcing stories. So the low-hanging fruit is already taken. And we look at the mainstream media as our low-hanging fruit. So it's that trauma porn, the crime violence, the in-community corruption. People love in-community corruption. 4Ds. These are all things mainstream media loves to cover. It's the very low-hanging fruit. It requires very little energy. It requires almost nothing. But a new, press release or someone's Facebook post. And then in the middle, we have storytellers. And then at the top, we have the really sensitive ones that require self-location and heavy data sovereignty. Data sovereignty should be spread over all of these, and as well as self-location. But the very top is something that, as a non-Indigenous person, is probably not for you. That's probably knowledge that is for Indigenous people. But the middle, the storytellers, that's where it takes work to get to these berries. It takes kinship building. It takes respect of not trampling on others to get to these stories, to not disturbing ecosystems, not disturbing teachings to get here. So these stories are really important, and these are the ones that I feel like when we are talking about pouring the love and the beauty back into our people, these are the stories that help with that. These are ones that bring the beauty and our sqilx'w confidence back. So sharing stories, of course, within complete respect of teachings and protocols. So for instance, sharing a story about maybe the elders are transferring knowledge to young people about how to, tan a hide or something like that. Those are how we can deliver different teachings and protocols. Language, Indigenous governance, sqilx'w brilliance, place-based stories, place names, and profiles as an act of knowledge preservation. To me, storytelling is knowledge preservation. That's what it is. And it is to pour that sqilx'w love back into our children who maybe don't live at home, who maybe this is the only time they get to connect with their community is by seeing these stories. And finally having representation that feels good to us rather than it being always so based in our trauma. So using the berry picking protocol to think about these stories. And then sacred stories, private family stories, and oral storytelling are ones that we wouldn't really record. We wouldn't, that's just for us, that's just medicine for us. And that should come from the people of that nation. And if you're gifted with getting to hear those things, then we just honor that we were gifted that. So we do have another section, but we don't have time, and that's okay. It's all stuff that I can easily email to people to look at, and I can also email this presentation because it's so much information that we have to talk about. So I guess actually one thing I really want to talk about. So this is how we create safety plans. This is trauma-informed interview practices. So decolonizing and uncolonizing, I just think it's an important conversation and it'll only take a couple minutes. So my sister created that art piece. It's actually our mountains and it creates an image of a woman. So decolonizing belongs only to Indigenous peoples. Decolonization is the rematriation of tradition and culture to Indigenous people. Decolonization is the repatriation of land and sovereignty to Indigenous people. We must bring awareness to the depth of vigilance it takes to keep settler colonizers from colonizing decolonization, while actively erasing Indigenous sovereignty in favor of another rung in the race to supremacy. So decolonizing is for us to do as Indigenous people. Decolonization is a powerful movement that aims to confront historical and ongoing injustices and restore Indigenous sovereignty. So some misunderstandings. There can be misconception about who can engage in decolonization. It's crucial to clarify that decolonization is primarily for Indigenous people, and the impacts of colonization include dispossession of land, cultural erasure, violence, and the suppression of sqilx'w way of being. Decolonization aims to address these specific harms and restore Indigenous sovereignty and rectify the deep wounds inflicted on our communities. It's about reclaiming agency, teachings, and self-determination that were forcefully taken away. Power dynamics. The colonization process inflicted violence, dispossession, and erasure upon Indigenous peoples, so decolonization challenges the power dynamics and aims to rectify the historical and ongoing wrongs. Confronting oppression. Decolonization disrupts systems of oppression and have been maintained through colonization, which can lead to discomfort and resistance from those benefiting from the systems. Collective liberation. Decolonization seeks collective liberation by giving back land and resources that were stolen. It's a process of restoring kinships with homeland teachings and ways of being. A call for vigilance. As accomplices, it's crucial to be vigilant against the misuse of the term decolonization. We must recognize when it's being tokenized or used as a metaphor, which can further marginalize Indigenous efforts. Decolonization challenges settlers to critically examine their role in the process and asks them instead to actively support Indigenous-led initiatives. Decolonization is not about promoting violence, but confronting the violence of colonization. And one quote that I heard, and I can't remember who said it, but they were talking about decolonization, because decolonization can feel, it's our own liberation. And then so when Tk'emlups people get offended by our liberation, it's kind of like that, or that fear in them is are you scared that we will do the same thing to you that you did to us? And is that what that fear is? Because a lot of times that's what it is. It's that, that fragility and that privilege that can show up when we're ready to have these hard conversations. So what settlers can do is uncolonize. So uncolonizing is an active and conscious process of shedding the legacy of colonial influences that still linger in belief systems and actions. It's about dismantling the power structures, biases, and mindsets that perpetuate oppression, inequality, and cultural erasure. Uncolonizing is not about erasing history, but rather acknowledging it and working towards rectification. It's a commitment to learning, listening, and amplifying Indigenous voices while relinquishing privileges that have been inherited from a history of colonization. So some examples of uncolonizing is decentering your perspective. Recognize that your worldview has been shaped by colonial ideologies. Make an effort to understand and respect different worldviews and knowledge systems. Supporting Indigenous initiatives. Directly support Indigenous-led organizations, businesses, and initiatives. Question your beliefs. Reflect on your own beliefs, biases, and assumptions. Challenge stereotypes and prejudice that may have been formed by colonial ideologies. And then, this is a very active way, returning colonized homelands. You can will your land back to the Indigenous people as a way of enacting land back initiatives. Settlers can uncolonize as this is voluntarily distancing, detaching from colonial mores. I just really wanted to have that conversation of what it looks like to decolonize versus uncolonize, so that, because I know that's just like a word and it's become somewhat of a buzzword, and we just wanted to bring some truth and brevity to it before the end. And then this is our outro email. Oh, that's not even, there we go. Sorry. I don't know if anyone wanted to take a picture of anything, but we have like 10 minutes left for questions. So I hope this email doesn't find you. I hope you've escaped and that you're free and you're eating salmon with berries on your face. Love Synclip. And then Lim Lim, which is one of our highest honorable thank yous. But for real, if you have any follow-up questions, comments, or anything, please email us and we'd love to hear from you. That's our website and that's our email. Again, on our website, you can find our thoughts on data sovereignty. You can find our protocols of working with us. And yeah, so we'll open it up for questions. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
There we go.
So decolonize means Indigenous-led. And so IndigiNews, which is also on the shirt, is Indigenous-led. It's an Indigenous, and that is what decolonizing is, right? And so we can want that for the future of media. Because of our inherent knowledge of caretaking people in the land, it should be that way. And that we are owed back our narrative. And so I absolutely believe you can wear that. You can rock that. Yeah, I think that is the hard part, is because I truthfully cannot come up with the solution of it, right? And I think too, when it's something that it's a responsibility, especially as a non-Indigenous, for you, but every other non-Indigenous journalist to do, right? Is to take on that fight and to figure out how to work your own systems, because I don't have the answers for systems that are foreign to me. I only have the answers of how we can, not answers, but I only have my own teachings and ways of going about things. But we do always, want people to show up authentically in the work that you do and do the best that you can. And as Sister and I said, is, we know better, we do better. And so as you move along and you refine processes, having small conversations go a long way. And that's one of our beliefs in our nation is those small ideas grow really big. To start refusing different editorial things that you don't agree with, putting yourself in that position to say, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm not doing that. Because for us, we have lost a lot. And so when anyone stands up on behalf of our people, or stands up in the face of systems that harm us, that goes a long way for who we, how safe we are when we go to work in those places. And so, for you, I feel like that would be your strength, is to be able to confront the system and move through the discomfort of it, because the discomfort is our status quo. And so, being able to use your voice in that way would be a really powerful thing. I'll actually reflect on something my colleague Eden Fine shared yesterday, which is, because we hear that a lot with this, but what that is that's us not feeling seen or safe in our workplace. And that is the problem. It's the problem to not be visible in our workplace. And we have to be okay to, for me, I've made it vocal in every single workplace that I'll leave. You don't need my talent, my skill, my time, my ceremony to be part of your outlet if you're not gonna hear me, see me, or respect me. Or respect my people, most importantly, because that's who my accountability is to my people. And so because I act in that way, and because I value that, I've always been taken care of, because I trust that. I trust that that as long as I do good for the people, then I'll be taken care of. And I always have. And I know that sounds so not comforting, but I want you to feel respected in your workplace. And I think, I want our stories to be that way. And that's why I say we have to stop protecting colleagues who are unsafe. And that creates so much harm. And when we think of some of the examples of how, even something like pretendianism has harmed our people, people coming into our community pretending to be somebody else that they're not, and then gathering our stories from us. And then we vouched for them, right? We vouched for them to enter the community. That creates distrust between our own people. So then we have to be able to speak up and say, this person harmed me, I tried to rectify it and it wasn't. In our nation, we hold up anyone who does that. We hold up anybody who does wrong knowingly, right? And like we say, everyone at IndigiNews will stand beside any single Indigenous journalist who has those problems. And if you read some of our letters, our very strongly worded love letters that we have, we've held a lot of outlets accountable for how they talk about our people. Because, at the end of the day, our people are dying from things that media is just this is just a daily news cycle for us. Like we shared yesterday in the panel when we were reporting on the uncovering of our 215 relatives, at that same time, because that's the school my family went to, at the same time, media was putting out all these, insensitive headlines, and we had several suicide attempts in our nation at that time because that news was so hard on our people. Because we had stories that were validated in this whole new way, we always knew it, but in this whole new way, where now it feels like we have to tell everybody all over again, relive it all over again. And our grandfather locked himself in his bedroom because he just couldn't take the news anymore. He couldn't take any of it anymore. That's so real. People turning off the Red Road journey and relapsing into their kinship with addictions, because that was the only way that we could cope. And so when I think of my work and I think of the power that, I have in terms of having that platform, it's my responsibility to speak against those things, to speak against the harms that are keep being perpetuated, and being okay not being liked. Because if you're liked by your colonial media outlet, then we're done people pleasing. But just know we will actually stand with you in anything that you have to go through. That Indigenous people, all racialized people should be systems of safety and should be networks of safety, and we should stand beside each other when we're going through hard times, and just be in solidarity. So please know that we're here. Yes. Thank you. That's a good question. I think, yes, data back would be them having ownership over that. So you're giving them the raw, that's their ownership over it. In copyright, that's what it is. And so giving them back that. And then when you publish it, in our agreements that we write with people, we allow them to be very much part of the process. So it's, do you want the whole thing, and do you want me to delete it on my end? Because I always have a thing about how we get rid of the information on our end. I'll send it to them, and then they'll say, oh, I received it, and then I say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and delete the files on my end now, because I have what I need on file for like legal whatever. And then I delete the rest, and they know that, and they're in agreement with it. So I would say definitely, and if you have to keep it on file for any purpose, that's fine, but then as long as they have a copy of it and that they get to own it, and also they are allowed to use it in whatever way they want to use it, because that's their story and that's their narrative. So yeah, great question. Oh, yes, of course. And we will send out the slideshow if anybody wants it. And if you, I don't know if you can turn that back on. If you can email us if you do want a copy, that's just the easiest way for us to send it to you, because then we'll have your email and be able to send it back to you. But absolutely. And so again, this was not the full training. Our full training is minimum 4 hours, but we love to have 2 days because we do embodiment practice as well, so that this really makes sense. Like you live through the process of an Alkin week. And so, yeah, it is 12. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, well, no, I haven't come into. No. We've never confronted it. We do know that, but that's why we do keep copies of whatever we legally need. We keep the bare minimum of what we need, and we're transparent about what that bare minimum is. And so we'll send them a copy of the entire file that we are keeping, and we'll say, this is everything we have. Now you know what we have. This is on our side. This is what we're keeping for these reasons, and we explain it. And then we give them everything, though. Like, even if it's a copy, at least they still have everything. Pictures that were not used, everything goes back, and is not for us to hold on to. And so, so that's kind of how we work with it.
So anything you would have published, you have the source material for, but everything else goes.
Yes, yeah. And then we also talk about deletion with them, like what does that look like? Because we also want to make sure that we're not doing anything insensitively either, where it's just like, oh, we deleted it. It's kind of like, like we just share within the process that we're honoring their story, that it belongs to them and they're the rightful owners of it. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you all at the gala. I didn't know that it was tonight.